He says, I'm warring with you. He says, I'm battling with you. He says, I'm going to abandon you. Watch this. He says, I'm withdrawing myself from you. He says, what you think is godly and you think that you feel God, it ain't really God. He says, it ain't even really me because he says, I'm pulling back myself because what I see is haughty and I don't see no humility. Can you believe that you can have a church full of people who believe that they feel the presence of God, but they ain't really feeling God's presence because God says, I withdrew myself from you because I resist you because your pride, watch it now, not not your not morality. Boy, if I just found my people, not my morality, not my strongness, not my stronghold. He says, I'm telling you that what I'm pulling back from is your pride. And I know that you do all the right things and you say the right things, but somewhere along the line, as leaders, as Christians, you hate each other. And he says, I'm pulling back. He says, he says, he says, I resist the proud. I resist your narcissism. I resist your need to be so important that I've abandoned you. Now, I'm glad it ain't the convocation, and I hope it ain't our churches, but can you imagine we singing our A and B selection? We done ran through the order of service. We done did all this jumping and shouting, and God said, I was never here. He says, I resist the proud and I give grace to the humble. He says, now, getting to our theme. He says, in all of that introduction, he says, the first 6 verses is your haughtiness. And he says, what I want to see at the end is your humility. And so he gives them, if you will, I don't want to be too, but yeah, since I'm with y'all here with me. So he says, I want to give you 10 commandments, 10 imperatives. And verses 7 through 10, he says, I want to give you 10 imperatives. We ain't going to do all 10. That ain't going to happen. But let's do 3 of them. He says, I'm going to give you three imperatives, 3 commands. And he says, this is what I want you to do. He says, point 1, he says, I want you to be submissive. And then he says, I want you to be resistant. And then I want you to be engaged in pursuing, relentlessly pursuing. He says, I want you to submit, and then I want you to resist, and then I want you to pursue. And he uses what we call the imperative. He says, this is not a suggestion. He says, this is a command. He says, and I'm telling you that if you do these 3 things, there's 10 of them, but he says, if you do these 3 things, then I will negate your haughtiness, and then I'll see humility, and then I'll show up in my presence, and then you can pursue me. Boy, if I had it. He says, this is what I want you to do. He says, I want you to submit. That's what we consider a military term. He says, I want you to submit. He says, I want you to come up under. He says, I want you to come up under of authority. He said, I want you to come up under. He says, now, for this to make sense, he says in verses 1 through 6, he says, in all of your haughtiness, he says, somewhere along the line, I want you to put who you think you are up under. He says, I want you to put all of your titles up under. He says, I want to put all of who you think you are up under. He says, I want to put up all of your love of your own self up under. And he says that I want you to submit. He says, I want you to submit unto God. He says, I want you to submit unto God, because once you submit unto God, you watch it now, you get rid of your haughtiness and you engage in levels of humility. Now, watch this. Watch this. Watch this. The word there that he uses in terms of submit is a word that happens in Luke chapter 2, verse 51, where it says, and Jesus, when he was 12, goes to his home where his parents are, and the text says, and he submits and gets up under his parents. Now, come on, watch this. He says, the way that I want you to do, I want you to act like Jesus. Because Jesus Christ, the Son of God, who was on the right hand of God, who came through the womb, and then came in the flesh, and then became a human being, and then he decided that with all of his power, with all that he is, he decided to squash that down, and watch it now, and come up under a human being. You look like this ain't good preaching. See, he says, whoever you think you are, if God is great enough, if God is powerful enough, if God can relinquish who he is to come up under a human being, who are you to walk around with all of your haughtiness thinking that you are that important? Because if Jesus has submitted himself, then you ought to submit yourself. You looking like this? This is you listen. Let me see. Let me see how this works. Watch this. Watch this. Watch this. One of my closest friends, my male friends, I told him, Bishop Thompson, I told him that I just finished my degree, and he's my closest friend. You know, he says, now what should I call you now? He said when we first started off, Troy, you were Brother Troy, and then you was Reverend Troy, and then you became Pastor Troy. Then somebody came around and decided they're gonna make you Bishop Troy. Now you got a degree. Now you Reverend Dr. Troy. He says, what title should I call you? And I thought about it. You know, we were joking. I said, well, I want you to call me the Reverend Doctor. But then when I thought about it, I said, notice what you said. You said Brother Troy. Then you said Reverend Troy. Then you said Pastor Troy. Then you said Bishop Troy. Then you said Reverend Dr. Troy. And the key in all of those things is Troy. I wish I had somebody. When you are not so caught up on yourself, when you are not so caught up on who you think you are, you don't care what they call you, long as they seem to call you a child. Oh, I wish I had somebody, because I know where I'm at, because there are sometimes you can't even call them, you can't even call who they are. You got to call me who I am. I'm doctor, I'm reverend, I'm bishop. No, I'm just glad that I'm saved, sanctified, Holy Ghost filled, and come up under. You running around, everybody got to call you who you are. And by the way, that's for free. This ain't in my notes. That's what I'm saying for free, because I'm just chasing an idea. I think that people who are always hiding behind who they think they are really are kind of shaky. Because if I got to know who you are for you to express who you are, then you ain't knowing who you are. Come, come on, come up under. Now, that's for free. That's for free. I promise you. That's chasing an idea. Um, um, um. He said submit. He said submit, and the word that he uses is what we consider to be an aorist imperative passive tense, which suggests this ain't for I'm trying to be deep. I'm just trying to tell you what passive is. Passive means you have to volunteer it. Well, if I had somebody, so I ain't got to go and seek God for that. I ain't got to fast for that. I ain't got to have a deep revelation and lay on my face. God says you just got to will it. You got the will to be a volunteer, to let go of who you think you are, to get rid of your haughtiness, and then come up under and watch it out. And it got to be volunteer. Somewhere along the line, I got to volunteer. I've got to surrender who I think I am, that when I come into his presence, I'm going to get there in a few minutes. Before I come into his presence, God ain't too concerned of who I think I am. He ain't caught up that I'm the bishop and I'm the reverend and I'm the doctor and I'm whatever I am. I am now saved. And I've got to volunteer it. This. I'll make it more convocation moment. I'll holler and then. Um, 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 he says, James says to the community, he says, you've got to surrender. You ain't got to always be the boss. You ain't got to tell everybody you the boss. You ain't got to tell everybody you the leader. You ain't got to tell everybody that you put it together. Because I give, watch it now, I give grace. He says that's the first part. Submit. He said, but then he comes around. He says, after you submit, then you got to resist. You got to resist the thing in you that keeps you disconnected to others. And he uses the word resist the devil. But you got to watch it in context. Come on, I'm talking to you preachers now. Listen, you got to read it in context. When he says resist the devil, he's not talking about per se the devil. He's talking about the evil that is inside of you. Because every time I seek to do good, it's in me. I ain't got to keep looking for other people. What's really going on? There is something in me, and I've got to resist that thing that is in me that causes me to be, watch it now, disrespectful of you. If I had somebody, see, I ain't got to keep looking for somebody else by criticizing them. I've got to figure out how I can, watch it now, to condemn myself, to evaluate myself, to resist the thing that is in. Oh, I'm preaching. You don't even know. You ain't got to even give me an offer for this thing is helping me. Listen. I got to find that thing in me that is messing with not respecting you. Now, I've been in church a long time. Matter of fact, been in church all my life. And people always talk about, it's them, but it ain't them. It ain't them. It's me. It's something inside of me that, watching out, that I've got to resist that thing. Watch it now. Watch it. Watch it. The word that James uses, he says, resist the devil. You understand? He's talking about, he says, yeah, I understand. But the way that I want you to understand what the devil is the person that engages in slander and accusation. He says you've got to resist that thing, that you ain't sitting around always judging and accusing and slandering others. You've got to find that thing in you. So watch it now. So when they ain't doing what they supposed to do, you do what you supposed to do because you are resisting. I know we are, we are, we are, we're saved people. So watch it now. I gotta find how to evaluate me. Uh, resist, resist the devil. And so some of you saying I'm so super saint. Not all of y'all. Not except maybe a few of us. We super saints, and you know, he ain't bothering me. But I want you to give you at least 4 things that you just need to know. The enemy don't care who he attacks, according to the Bible. Genesis chapter 3, verse 1. He attacks the innocent. Come on here, Eve. She was innocent. Come on, but he was tempting her. He was tempting her because he don't care who he attacks. Come on, Jesus, testify in Matthew chapter 4. He's the invincible one. He's the invincible one. But here comes the devil again. Watch it now, trying to tempt him. Oh, if I had somebody. Come here, Paul. Come here, Paul. Tell Timothy. He says, you've got to learn how to flee useful lusts. Because, watch it now, you ain't strong enough. So even when you're immature, find a way to flee him because you ain't strong enough. I'm just trying to tell you what the enemy does. He don't care who he attacks. Matter of fact, he's going to do the best to, watch that, bother some of you right now because he don't want you to, watch it now, walk in a level of humility. Come on. Who I fight the armor? Well, I just please let me come back next time. Let me come back. I want to make this clear because I've been in church a long time. The devil is not concerned with our gymnastics. You can't give him a black eye. You can't be stomping on him. You got to fight the enemy the way God gave you how to fight him. You got to fight him with the word of God. You got to fight him with the whole armor of God. You got to be watching now. You've got to be aware that the enemy is in you right now, and you got to fight so hard, watch it now, to resist it. I'm coming on to why we're trying to be relentless in our worship, but watch it now. I can't get there unless I engage in a level of submission and watch it now, in a spirit of resisting. And I'm not trying to resist just something out there because I know there's an enemy force out there. But there's something. Come on now. So he says, if you do these 2 things, and I told you it's 10, but if you do these 2 things, you're on your way, watch it now, to humility. You don't have to run around being seen. I ain't gotta. I was just thinking, just for free. This is saying something to Michelle. No, just one, because we got to get rid of that bio. That's too long. There's too much. Somewhere along the line, we just got to put, thank God for using me. If I had this church, we would be shouting right about now. Somewhere we need to open up our mouth and say, God, thank you for using me. Because whatever I've been doing is because of your grace and your mercy. I'm coming on in. I'm coming on in. All right, come on, come on. I'm getting rid of, I'm bringing up under, I'm letting go of some things, and I'm watching out, and I'm submitting myself. I'm submitting myself. And then along with submitting myself, watch it now, I'm resisting some things. And then he says, he comes back around and he says, but then I want you to pursue. He says, you draw nigh to God. Hey. And God will draw nigh unto you. Now I'm glad that James put it in such a way. I'm glad that James put it in such a way. He says, you can't even get to drawing nigh to me if you ain't going to surrender. And you ain't going to get close to me unless you're able to have the ability to resist. He says, if you don't do these first two, you can't get to the third. Well, I'm about to help. You can't even enjoy God being haughty. You can't even enjoy God without the spirit of letting go of some things. He says, now. That's what he says. In some translation, now you can. So that you can draw nigh. I want to bring this up because this is important. And I promise you, one more teaching point then. Then that's when we know we had a good time, right? Drawing nigh to God will seem like it's works. Be careful when you're talking to people who are not sensitive to the understanding of God. The suggestion is that if you draw nigh to God, God will draw nigh to you.